Transformers, like any good franchise, has had a long line of video games released throughout the years. In this series, we're going to be taking a brief look at each and every Transformers game that had been released, and even some that weren't. Up until the 2007 movie tie-in games, Transformers games were prominently exclusive to Japan. The first ever Transformers game produced was Transformers Mystery of Convoy for the Famicom in 1986, which followed the tale of Ultra Magnus attempting to locate the missing Optimus Prime while fighting off various hordes of generic enemies, as well as a few notable Decepticons such as Bruticus, Menasor, Megatron, and Trypticon. The game was a basic 2D side-scroller that contained 10 levels. The game was critically panned not only for its poor controls and lazy gameplay, but also its immense difficulty, which I'm sure you can see. A second Transformers game was produced in 1986 and published by Ocean Software, this time based off the earlier seasons of Generation 1, as evident by its cast of characters. It was simply entitled The Transformers and was released on the Commodore 64 and Sinclair Spectrum. The game was mostly similar to the Mystery of Convoy game, though focused more on platforming than shooting. It featured a more diverse cast of characters, allowing you to choose from 5 different characters to play as. The game featured a few unique mechanics that were quite unique for the time, though it still received fairly mediocre reviews from across the board. The third Transformers game to be released was also available on the Commodore 64, Transformers Battle to Save the Earth. It was published by Activision, and opposed to its 2 predecessors, it was a role-playing battle game. The player was able to command 8 Autobots to attack the Decepticons and gather energy, slowly building up points. The main aim of the game is to collect more points than the Decepticons. Yet again, though the concept was fairly unique, the game was not received very well. The Transformers The Headmasters was published on the Famicom Disk System by Takara in 1987. It improved where its predecessors failed on multiple accounts and changed up the usual formula, though still being reminiscent of the original Mystery of Convoy game. The player can choose from 5 characters and are thrown into levels with 2 main segments, a stage that takes place above ground where your character is in vehicle form, and an underground maze-like level played in robot form. The player unlocks a new character each stage and is able to switch between them at will. It is also the first Transformers game that was able to be saved, which served as a useful addition to the game considering its difficulty. Despite all of these additions and improvements, the game was still hated by many, and considered to be worse than Mystery of Convoy. Transformers game was scheduled for release on the Game Boy, though was cancelled fairly on in development. Not much is known about this game, though it can be assumed it would have been similar to that of Mystery Convoy and the Headmasters in terms of gameplay. Generation 2 only received one minor game in the form of a small handheld game released in 1993. It was published by Tiger and was a black and white LCD display. The game involves playing as Optimus Prime and defending yourself from attacking enemies in truck mode, or shooting at them in robot mode. Other Autobots were also able to be called on for assistance, and the game spanned 4 levels, which each contained a boss at the end of them. The game is very rare and fairly unheard of. The Beast era received its fair share of video games, though a majority were only available in Japan. The first was simply called Beast Wars Transformers and was released in December of 1987 for PC and later PlayStation. The game is a basic third-person shooter, allowing players to partake in both Maximal and Predacon campaigns, and play as various characters from each side to complete various levels, in which you fight against a strange alien called Skreeks, that allow you to fight some truly strange and questionable creatures. The game allows you to switch between robot and beast mode at will, and also featured rescue missions, in which your playable character had to rescue one of your team members through a process of defeating enemies and collecting red microchips that serve as points. Following the line of reception of the previous Transformers games, Beast Wars was heavily criticized for its broken controls, unoriginality, and immense difficulty. The next Beast Wars game to be released was Dual Fight Transformers Beast Wars, Beast Warriors' Strongest Decisive Battle, a name that just rolls off the tongue. It was released in 1999 by Takara for the Game Boy Color. The game is a basic fighting game, with 2 characters duking it out in a 2D setting. The controls are fairly basic, with a button for a punch and kick, and various button combinations for combos. The game features a unique transforming mechanic that allowed for different attacks. The player has what is known as a BP gauge, which can be charged. It serves one of 2 functions once charged. It can activate a hyper mode that increases the player's power for a short while, and also allows for a super finisher attack, a powerful attack that does immense damage. A desperation attack is also able to be performed if one does the finisher backwards. The game was only available in Japan. Beast Wars Transmetals was yet another Beast Wars themed fighting game released on the PlayStation and Nintendo 64. The two versions of the game differ in the character roster and certain features. The Nintendo 64 version featured a story that explained the plot of the game. Megatron, captured by the Maximals at the end of the Beast Wars cartoon, managed to send a message to his past self via transwarp that was fighting in the Beast Wars. The future now endangered, the player must battle Megatron and his Predacons in order to stop them. The game allows you to play as both Maximal and Predacon, and functions like a basic fighting game, with certain buttons performing basic and heavy attacks. Yet again, the player is able to transform into their beast mode to perform different attacks. The player can also charge up and perform a powerful super attack that would deal more damage than regular attacks. While the PlayStation version of the game omitted a story, the Nintendo 64 version had text-based endings for each of the 12 playable fighters, 13 in Japan, after you beat the story with them. The game received fairly low scores from critics for its broken controls and gameplay and useless enemy AI. However, the PlayStation version of the game revealed the appearances of a Transmetal Rhinox and Waspinator, characters never seen in the show. The first 3D Transformers game was released on the PS2 in 2003, and changed up the formula seen before in Transformers games. Though mainly referred to as simply the Transformers PS2, leading to it to be confused with the 2004 Armada game of the same name, its true title was given as Transformers: The Call to the Future. It featured a fairly large story littered with references to the show, contained a massive amount of characters, both playable and non-playable, and featured a total of 13 total stages, 10 for the Autobot story and 3 for the Decepticon story. Its gameplay was largely based around that of a beat-em-up, though the main mechanic was a role-playing fighting system. Players would do battle with large hordes of enemies and bosses, able to use a variety of different attacks, including vehicle mode attacks. The game was fairly buggy and difficult to both control and play, and though commended for its graphics and large story, has been hated by fans and critics alike for years. That's it for this video. Come back next time when we dive into the more modern Transformers games from the 2000s.
The invisible wall seems to have disappeared. Looks like we can't get rid of that wall unless we take care of all of them. The invisible wall seems to have disappeared.
A Generation 2 game was in the works for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System by Argonaut Software. The game is rumoured to have been reworked into what would have become Vortex, a game released by Argonaut in 1994, causing the Generation 2 game to be ultimately cancelled. In 2015, an interview with the programmer dismissed this rumour, claiming that the two projects were entirely separate, and that the Generation 2 game was simply cancelled during development. In 2004, following the release of the Transformers Armada cartoon, Australian game development studio Melbourne House created a game for the PlayStation 2 with the title of Transformers, though the initial name was Transformers: Prelude to Energon. This was of course in reference to Transformers Energon, which had recently begun airing at the time. The game was published by Atari and is a third-person shooter, allowing players to take control of one of the three main Autobots and traverse wide and expansive levels searching for various hidden minicons throughout the game, and trouncing hordes of generic Decepticon enemies. The game hides 40 collectible minicons across the various levels, and up to 4 minicons can be attached to the player at a time to grant certain power-ups and abilities. The minicon lock-on, for example, allows for homing missiles to be fired, and high jump allows for increased jumping abilities. The game was very well received amongst fans and critics, being the very first Transformers game to do so. It was the 7th top-selling game across all platforms in May of 2004, and sold over 600,000 copies. This total, however, did not reach Atari's initial expectations. Issues people had with the game was the fairly high difficulty, small roster of playable characters, and lack of directions or instructions that caused players to become lost in the vast environments the game throws you into. A sequel to the game was in the works by Melbourne House once again, though this time partnered with Brooklyn Games. It was to be published for Hasbro's educational Ion video game console, and was able to use Sony's iToy software to allow players to interact with objects on screen. It was slated for release in 2006, though due to a combination of both poor sales on the Ion and Melbourne House being moved onto other projects for Atari, it was cancelled. Whenever a massive blockbuster movie hits the theaters, video games are sure to follow. Sure enough, the Transformers live-action movies saw a boom in the video game industry for Transformers. The very first Transformers game based on the movies was Transformers the Game, released for PS2, PS3, Xbox 360, Wii and PC. The game was released in 2007 in conjunction with the movie, and was published by Activision and developed by Traveller's Tales. The game featured two campaign modes, one for Autobot and one for Decepticon. The player could take control of a character from either faction through missions and levels based on the film's plot, though with a few differences. The various platforms the game was available on caused the several versions of the games to differ slightly. The PlayStation 2 version received the highest reviews despite its many flaws due to technological limitations, such as low draw distance, and the Wii version features several lackluster motion control gimmicks. The game received fairly low reviews due to its repetition with gameplay and poor controls. The game was praised, however, for its destruction engine, as the pre-play sections of the game that take place in between missions allow the player to wreak havoc amongst the level they reside in, able to destroy buildings, cars, and other objects. The PlayStation Portable version of the game was fairly similar to the console version, though featured new playable characters such as Shockwave, Trailbreaker, and Hoist not seen in the movie. The gameplay, however, is atrocious. The controls are broken and unresponsive, the hints are useless, and the game is overall a dread to play. It, of course, received nothing but negative reviews from across the board. However, the game did support multiplayer battle modes, which no other version of the game contained. The Nintendo DS featured its own two versions of the game. In a Pokemon style, both Autobot and Decepticon versions of the games were available, allowing players to follow each faction's respective story. The Autobot game follows the story of the movie, the Decepticon story shows the tale from a different point of view, in which the Decepticons attempt to revive their fallen leader and destroy the Autobots. Unlike the other two versions, however, the DS version of the game saw players creating their own character, called Creator-Bot, to play as throughout the game. Various vehicles could be scanned throughout the game as well for the player to take as their own, adding an extra element to the game that the console and PSP versions lacked. Gameplay is a dumbed-down version of the console games, and missions see players completing various tasks and battling Decepticons, though in between, free-play modes allowed players to roam around the open-world environments freely, exploring, fighting Decepticons, and scanning new vehicles. The game also featured an online multiplayer ability with its Allspark Wars challenges, which pit players against each other in order to unlock points for new alternate modes for their characters. The game received fairly sour scores due to its poor graphics and constant glitches, though was praised for its open world and character creation. A mobile game was released by Glue based on the movie. It featured 2D side-scrolling and shooting gameplay in which the players take control of Optimus Prime to fight various Decepticon drones. Transformers Battle Universe was a Transformers game produced for Hasbro's poorly selling NetJet online game system. The game featured playable Autobots and Decepticons from various continuities, such as the movie series, Generation 1, Beast Wars, and Animated. The gameplay is that of a usual 2D fighting game, with various different attacks and combos and a special attack that does extra damage able to be dished out. The game featured 5 different environments to battle in, various items that restored health and special attack, and a few alt mode attacks were able to be pulled off, though were not nearly as effective as normal attacks. When the NetJet was discontinued on the 31st of December in 2009, the game was rendered unplayable. Transformers Animated the Game is a puzzle and platform game released by Activision for the DS in 2008. In it, the player is given 3 Autobots, Optimus, Bumblebee, and Bulkhead, though can only control one at a time, having to switch between them. Each character has their own special abilities that assist in solving puzzles and defeating enemies throughout the 24 levels of the game. Prime has the ability to press buttons by throwing his axe, as well as being able to reach higher platforms by using his grapplers. Bulkhead uses his strength to break open doors and can move objects. Bumblebee has the ability to jump and can wall jump to areas inaccessible by the other 2 Autobots. The game also contains a few driving levels in which the player can now take control of Prowl to drive across the highways of Detroit. Though the game was criticized for being unoriginal, it was praised for being a solid puzzle game, and so received fairly okay reviews. Transformers Revenge of the Fallen the game was released for Xbox 360, PlayStation 3 and 2, and Wii in conjunction with the movie. The version of the game on the former 2 consoles differed to that of the latter 2 in terms of quality and gameplay. The PS2 and Wii versions of the game featured limited gameplay and repetitive levels. Players were unable to transform in this version of the game during robot mode missions. The PS3 and 360 version of the game, taking heed of its predecessor, allowed players to take control of various Autobots and Decepticons in 2 campaigns for each faction through a basic version of the movie's plot. The game was a basic third-person shooter, with players progressing through the various levels, mowing down enemies and fighting various bosses scattered throughout the game. Unlike the 2007 movie game, Revenge of the Fallen also contained an online mode. A PSP version of the game was available and was drastically different to that of the console version. The game was developed by Savage Entertainment for Activision and featured a top-down perspective where players progress levels battling various enemies by performing either melee attacks or shooting them and gaining points by defeating said enemies. The game also featured a survival mode where the player has to survive as long as possible, taking down enemies and gaining the highest score they can. The story is once again loosely based on that of the movie, and the game was very poorly received. Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen, Autobots and Decepticons were two games released for the Nintendo DS. They were developed by Vicarious Visions and were released in time for the movie. The two games are largely similar to that of the previous two Transformers movie DS games, where the player takes control of their own creator bot, scan vehicles and battle the enemies of whatever faction they are playing as. The gameplay was not largely changed from the previous two games, though did not feature the same open world, and also gave the players the option of two weapons as opposed to just one. Autobots and Decepticons featured only 5 playable characters for each faction, and characters such as Optimus, Bumblebee, Sideways and Barricade were only playable during challenge missions. Each faction also contained a flying character, Breakaway for the Autobots and Starscream for the Decepticons, which were only playable in a few levels of the game. The game was surprisingly well received, receiving a 7 out of 10 from IGN. Finally, a mobile game developed by Glue was made for Revenge of the Fallen in 2009. The game is a platformer featuring Bumblebee and Optimus Prime as playable characters. Using the numeric keys on the phone, players direct their character through the game battling enemies. The player can transform into vehicle mode, jump, and use melee attacks to dispatch enemies. The game also contains a few puzzles that must be completed by pushing boxes in vehicle mode to certain areas in order to progress. Transformers: Dark of the Moon was a game developed by High Moon Studios and released in 2011 as promotional material for the movie. The game was fairly different to its two predecessors, as it only featured a single campaign of 7 levels allocated to either Autobot or Decepticon. The game is a prequel to that of the movie, with the story detailing Megatron's plan to free Shockwave from his cryostasis imprisonment. The gameplay is that of a third-person shooter, with the gameplay very similar to the recently released Transformers War for Cybertron. Players had 2 weapons to choose from, and each character had both an extra heavy weapon that could be used after having time to charge and a special ability. Players could also transform into their alternate modes, featuring new mech tech stealth modes that allowed players to shoot whilst in vehicle mode. The game also featured an online mode with players able to choose from 4 different classes to battle in team deathmatches. The game received fairly mediocre reviews. The Nintendo version of the Dark of the Moon game was very different to the other console versions. Dark of the Moon Stealth Force Edition was released for the Nintendo Wii and 3DS and had no ability to transform into robot mode. Instead, the game focuses more on the vehicular combat of the new Stealth Force toys. Each level sets the player in a small arena environment and pits them against enemies that will try and take you down. Using your Stealth Force weapons, players not only have to take them down but also race to various checkpoints throughout the small area within a certain time limit. The game received very negative reviews from across the board. Once again, 2 separate games, Autobots and Decepticons, were released for the Nintendo DS. They were published by Behavior Interactive and are third-person shooters that are prequels to the movie. The game spans 12 levels for both versions, with the player playing as one of 4 characters from each side that are set for each level. In each level, players shoot their way through hordes of enemies using 2 different weapons, as well as being able to convert into vehicle mode to unleash the firepower of the Stealth Force upon them. The new ability of hacking was also available, allowing players to hack enemy turrets and convert them onto your side. Upgrades are also available to strengthen characters. Due to the game being a step down from its 2 predecessors in terms of gameplay, the game received mixed to negative reviews. Yet another mobile game was produced to advertise the movie, published by Glue once again. The Dark of the Moon mobile game allows players to play as either Optimus or Bumblebee and traverse 13 levels battling enemies using either melee attacks or shooting, with one of the 13 weapons in the game. That's it for this video, but come back next time as we explore the Aligned games and apps. Transformers: Rise of the Chevy Autobots is an online game released in 2007 as promotion for the movie. The game focuses on the player creating their own character using set templates that are based on the Chevrolet cars. Rise of the Chevy Autobots sees the player challenging online players to combat, and within these rounds both combatants choose their moves they wish to use and where on an opponent they wish to attack, and this is all done before the actual fight. The battle then plays out through cutscenes, and the victor is whoever does the most damage to their opponent. Players were limited to 10 challenges a day, and was unable to challenge the same player more than once. Characters were also upgradable through points gained from battles. Eventually, the game was updated so that players were able to challenge computer drones instead of fighting online opponents. Throughout the game, Bumblebee would drop hints to the player and also reward them with prizes. The game also contains its own original story, detailing the Autobots battling the evil new Decepticon mainframe. The Rise of the Chevy Autobots website is now defunct. Transformers G1 Awakening is a turn-based strategy RPG game made for mobile and released in 2008. It was published by Glue. The game contains 13 playable Autobots and 9 playable Decepticons, giving the player control of up to 4 at a time, in levels in which their goal is to either destroy enemy forces or capture power stations that are scattered throughout levels. Each character has green squares that appear on the map which indicate where they are able to move, and transforming into vehicle mode, which only characters with a vehicle alt mode can do, increases this space. Each turn provides both the player and opposing force with Energon, which they can use to upgrade their characters, or even spawn in other units if they have a character that is able to do so, such as Trypticon or Blaster. Though the game is presented in a 2D top-down perspective, as soon as characters meet, a 3D battle sequence initiates, displaying the damage taken by each character. The game contains 3 modes: Story Mode, Showdown, and Cybertron Arena. Story Mode takes players through various missions following simplified versions of Generation 1 episodes, Showdown contains various missions without story and increased difficulty, and Cybertron Arena allows for casual matches against either a second player or AI. The game has since been removed from the App Store for unknown reasons. As part of a promotion for 2011's Dark of the Moon film, Paramount Entertainment released a mobile app with the same name as the movie, which was a top-down endless runner that allowed the player to complete levels by attacking and defeating the various enemies that come their way. The player was able to transform into their alternate mode, perform melee attacks, and fire at enemies and fight their way across various levels playing as either Optimus or Bumblebee. Also as part of a promotion for Dark of the Moon, a company by the name of Explorer Engage released Defend the Earth, an app that allowed users to augment reality using their phone's camera. After scanning one of the various posters for the movie around, the player was able to play as Optimus Prime in a first-person perspective and shoot at enemies that appeared on screen, all the while moving the phone around for a 360-degree view. The game was reasonably successful but was only able to be played before the release of the movie. Transformers Legends was a multiplayer card battle game released on mobile devices in 2012 and 2013 and was published by Mobage. The aim of the game was to collect cards, improve your deck, and in turn improve your overall battle score. Cards were either gained through both in-game and real-life currency via the Space Bridge, a menu that allowed a plethora of in-app purchases that could earn you cards and items, or were found during story missions, as well as being a reward that could be earned in events. There are 3 types of cards: character, vehicle, and weapon cards. Players were able to transcan the former 2 into one card to make it more powerful, and further upgrade cards with in-game items. Battles in the game occurred automatically without player input, so a majority of Legends' gameplay comes from preparation. There were missions within stages available for players to partake in, allowing them to earn cards and credits, fight bosses, and fight others online. Online events occurred weekly, with a certain theme and cards up for grab. There were 4 types of events that the weekly events were categorized into: campaign events, raid events, player-on-player events, and team battle events, each which contained players battling online players and bosses to earn points on a leaderboard in order to win prizes, and each of the 4 categories featured different gameplay. The very first event was held in December of 2012 by the name of Harvest of the Insecticons, and from there another 97 events were held until Legends was sunsetted in October of 2015, meaning that online play was no longer available and that the game had been removed from the App Store, though Mobage thanked players and provided them with generous prizes during the last few months of the game's life. Transformers Online was a Chinese MMORPG set for release in 2012. It was set in the Aligned continuity, and was developed by a Chinese company called NetDragon. The plot of the game followed Megatron opening a space bridge and sending Tiger Packs to Earth, causing the city to split into 2. From there, the Autobots and Decepticons, separated on Earth, were hunted by a third faction, the Star Seekers. In the game, players would have been able to choose between the three factions from a selection of various characters. Beta testing for the game began in late 2011, and the game was released in 2012, but was then abandoned with no further information available aside from concept art depicting the characters that would have been in the game. The Bot Shots Battle game was an online game available on Hasbro's website released in 2012. Players were also able to use the codes that came packaged with the Bot Shots toys to unlock new gameplay options and characters. Players were placed into one-on-one matches against either online opponents or AI, and the battles functioned on a rock-paper-scissors style of gameplay, much like the toys, with sword, blaster, and fist available as options. Whichever player chose the superior attack will do damage to their opponents until they are victorious. The game also contains an adventure play mode, which allows the player to complete various story-based missions and fight bosses along the way, and the training mode in the game presents the player with various minigames to complete. Players were also able to purchase characters, attacks, and power-ups in the bot shop, using the Energon cubes you earn throughout the game. In early 2015, the game was deleted from Hasbro's website. Transformers Construct Bots was a mobile app that allowed players to build their own bots in the game by buying parts that they are able to place into a skeleton. Construct Bots provided customization in weapons and colour, and the aim of building bots was to place them into levels to battle once creation was complete. Battles were displayed by a cartoon dust cloud, however, instead of an actual animation, and the outcome of battles were based on the strength of the parts chosen. The game was removed from the App Store in October of 2016. Transformers Rising was a version of Transformers Legends available to those in Japan, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, with the only differences being the events and playable characters. Rather than being separate, events were categorized into arcs, and these arcs tended to have 11 events each. In total thus far, 46 events have occurred. The game was once again published by Mobage and released in 2014. Though the game had been set to end in late 2015, the game is still available to play to this day. Though technically more of an Angry Birds game than a Transformers game, Angry Birds Transformers is still worth mentioning in this video. Released in late 2014 for mobile by Rovio Entertainment, Angry Birds Transformers was a crossover between the two titular franchises. The story of the game is that the Allspark egg found its way onto Piggy Island and turned its inhabitants into Cybertronian animal hybrids. The Angry Birds are now the Autobirds, and the pigs the Decepticons. The game contains an overworld that allows players to select levels to complete. In these levels, after choosing characters that are unlocked or bought in the game, players must play a scrolling runner in which your character must shoot at blocks and enemies in the background before your character is damaged too much. During the level, the player can call on a second character that was chosen before the level that appears for a short time to assist you in doing some damage to enemies. If a player survives, they are picked up by Astro Train and taken back to the map after collecting royalties earned from the level. Each playable character plays differently. The telepod toys were also able to be placed onto devices to allow the player to play as that character for a limited time, as well as instantly repair characters damaged during levels. Angry Birds Transformers also contains daily quests, weekly events, and other various missions to complete. The game was very popular and is still available to be played today. Transformers Universe was an unreleased online action game planned for release in 2014, but development was cancelled in early 2015. The game would have seen players choosing either Decepticons or Autobots, choosing a class, and then being pitted against one another in arenas and battles to gain relics and Energon. The game takes place in the Aligned continuity and follows the story of two new Autobot and Decepticon ships crash landing on Earth, and immediately doing battle. The game contained a plethora of classes and characters to choose from. There were 6 game modes in Universe, including Elimination, a match with the victor being whoever gained the most kills, Meteor Storm, which was basically King of the Hill, Crisis, a mode where players and teams fight waves of Terracons, Dispatch, where players complete missions and mine for Energon, Recon, a capture the flag mode, and a training simulator. Concept art has been released for the game, providing evidence that characters from both the show and War for Cybertron will plan to have an appearance. Mystery of Convoy Returns was a mobile game published by DLE in 2014, serving as a homage to the original Mystery of Convoy game for the Famicom. The game was an endless runner, involving chibi versions of Transformers characters resembling the Q Transformers line, completing various levels by shooting enemies and battling bosses. The difficulty was reminiscent of the original, though levels now contain checkpoints to make things easier for the player. There were 8 levels in total, with bosses from the original game needing to be fought at the climax of each, and enemies also now dropped one of 3 power-ups: Speed Up, Speed Down, and Invincibility. The game was available for free, though contained in-app purchases available to continue after game overs, though the game was shut down in March of 2016. Transformers Age of Extinction was a mobile app produced by Dana and released in 2014. The game is an endless runner, and allows you to take control of various Autobots to play as in levels in which you must shoot and defeat the enemy hordes that come your way. The game contained 4 different areas that each contained several levels within them, each with a boss at the end that needed to be fought, and also contained weapon customization as you could unlock weapons within the game. Age of Extinction also contained weekly events that allowed the player to partake in special events, in which they could earn a reward at the end, either a new character or weapon. Throughout the game's life, 26 events took place until the game was shut down in September of 2015. Transformers Battle Tactics was an online multiplayer turn-based battle game released for mobile devices in 2015 and was published by Dana. The game involves the player gathering a team of 4 chibi versions of Transformers to battle both computer and online opponents. Battles were turn-based, and each of the 4 characters had 5 numbers that indicated the damage they could do, and 1 was chosen at random per round. The effect could change depending on whether the character was in robot or alternate mode. The player was also given a few power-ups to activate each turn that would do a great deal of damage to their opposition. The game contained various in-app purchases, and in-game currency allowed players to gain characters and items they could use to upgrade their characters and improve their team. Much like Legends, events were also held in which special characters were up for grabs. The game was officially shut down in May of 2016. Transformers Ultimate All-Stars was a free mobile game released exclusively in Japan in 2015. The game holds a large emphasis on character collection, and allows players to build teams consisting of characters from various continuities and upgrading them from there. Ultimate All-Stars has similar gameplay and execution to that of the previously released Battle Tactics, in which players deploy their teams onto 2D battlefields to battle against online and computer players to earn them more items in order to upgrade their characters. Much like Battle Tactics before it, All-Stars was shut down in March of 2016. All-Stars was then succeeded by Transformers Operation Omega, which recycled the same gameplay and graphics with new characters and maps. Operation Omega was short-lived, however, as it lasted a mere 3 months before it too was shut down. Transformers Frontiers was a free mobile game developed by Dana in 2015 and was only available in China. Frontiers resembles Battle Tactics in both style and gameplay, as the game revolves around collecting characters and creating a team to battle others, though Frontiers differs with the execution of battles, in which 6 units are now allowed, and players are provided with even more power-ups to dish out on their opponents. The biggest difference, however, is the inclusion of levels, including Unicron as a final boss that the player has to defeat. Similar to Battle Tactics though, the aim of the game is to collect characters and upgrade your team using collectible in-game items. As with most mobile games, however, Frontiers is played with microtransactions and in-app purchases. Transformers Robots in Disguise is a beat-em-up game released for mobile in 2015 by Marmalade Game Studio. The game allows the player to choose from 2 characters and various power-ups prior to levels, before entering a plethora of areas in which they must defeat enemies using various attacks that differ depending on how the player taps the screen. The player is also able to transform into their alternate mode, and when a character is defeated, the player must switch between the second character they chose in order for the first to regain health. The game also allows you to scan the Autobot or Decepticon insignia on various toys in the toy line to unlock that character in the game. A version of this game called Autobots Unite was also available on Apple TVs that contain the same gameplay and characters. Transformers Battle Masters is a mobile app released in 2016. Battle Masters is a boxing game, where players choose characters to fight in boxing matches with an over-the-shoulder view. Players swipe to attack and block, though attacking takes energy from an energon bar that replenishes over time. Eventually, the player is able to perform a super punch that deals a large amount of damage to their opponent. The game contains various levels, and the player is able to level up and unlock characters as they wish. Transformers Earth Wars is a mobile app released by Backflip Studios in mid-2016, and the game was written by none other than Simon Furman himself. The gameplay is very similar to that of the infamous Clash of Clans, where the goal of the game is to build and fortify a base, and growing an army to attack other bases and defend your own. Earth Wars contains over 40 playable characters, and the player is able to join alliances to fight against other bases. During attacks, the player is able to choose which units they spawn, and can also choose to activate various special abilities that cause more damage. Much like other games we've talked about in this video, Earth Wars places a large focus on resource collection, and they are all used to upgrade characters and improve your base. The game also contains a large amount of in-app purchases. Transformers Online is an upcoming online Chinese FPS game being developed by Tencent Games. It is not to be confused with the other Chinese Transformers Online. The gameplay is similar to that of Overwatch, in which players have both a melee and ranged weapon that they can switch between in combat to dispatch enemies. Characters also each possess their own special ability unique to that character. The game so far contains 4 different game modes. Point capture, in which 2 teams race to gain points on the map. Deathmatch, a free-for-all match where the victor is whoever gets the most kills. Blade Wars, where characters are only able to use their melee weapons. And a training mode for those who wish to practice their skills. Concept art for the game boasts all new detailed redesigns for various Transformers characters, and the game also seems to include both the Age of Extinction and Generation 1 Optimus Prime, suggesting the game may be cross-continuity. The game is set for release in 2017. Transformers Generations Collide is an upcoming mobile app published by Kabam that is yet to be released, though information is available about the game. It looks to be a 3D fighting game, and the roster appears to contain Transformers from across multiple continuities, and throughout the game the player is able to collect more characters. The game boasts new characters being added every week. The promo for the game also gives mention to the ability to join alliances within the game with other online players, and also build your own base to attack the bases of other players. The game also contains a campaign mode and is set to be released in early 2017. Hey everyone, thanks so much for sticking with me through this series. I really hope you enjoy taking a look at the history of Transformers video games. If you did, why not check out some of my other videos? Thanks, and I'll see you all in the next video. Diamond out. Transformers War for Cybertron had 3 different versions released across the 3 different types of consoles. Cybertron Adventures was the version released for the Wii, and it differed significantly to its console counterpart. It was developed by Next Level Games and released in 2010. The gameplay is similar to that of Time Crisis, with levels playing like rail shooters. The game has both Autobot and Decepticon campaigns that contain 8 levels each, and within them the player takes control of a different character each time to progress through the level and gun down enemies. Where it differs from its console counterpart is the free movement is usually restricted in the game, as players are simply moved to cover, where they must shoot down enemies using one of the 4 available weapons each character has in the game: a blaster, missile launcher, machine gun, and sniper rifle. Each weapon plays differently and is more effective with certain enemies. There are also a few vehicle mode sections of levels in which the player controls their character in vehicle mode to make it to the next checkpoint. As it is on the Wii, the game makes use of its motion controls, allowing the player to point the Wiimote towards enemies on the screen to aim. Cybertron Adventures also contains a multiplayer option, where another player can grab a Wiimote and aim it on the screen to shoot, but that's all that really changes. The game received very negative reviews for its boring and repetitive gameplay and poor graphics and textures. The DS version of War for Cybertron was available in a similar means to the movie games released for the DS earlier. Both Autobot and Decepticon versions of the game are available. The games were developed by Vicarious Visions and feature gameplay similar to that of its console version. Each game contains 8 levels that follow the same story as the console version, 13 characters are available in each game, and levels see players choosing 2 characters to switch between in the levels. Characters are classified into different types that play slightly differently from one another. One difference of the DS port to the console version is the inclusion of a leveling system, in which characters can level up after collecting experience from killing enemies. A watered-down version of the console multiplayer was also available through the DS Wi-Fi, with players being pitted against one another in arenas. One exclusive multiplayer function was anti-games, in which 2 opposing players bet their character on the outcome of the match. The winner would gain his opponent's character, though the loser is easily able to regain his lost character in the campaign mode of the game. War for Cybertron also featured an arena mode where players complete 6 missions in each of the 5 arenas to unlock characters and collect experience. The game received very average scores, and many reviewers claimed the game had solid concepts, though gameplay was stiff and repetitive. The console version of Transformers War for Cybertron is a third-person shooter game developed by High Noon Studios and released in 2010 for PC, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. The game follows the tale of the early stages of the Cybertronian War, detailing the earlier battles of Optimus and Megatron. The plot of the game goes hand in hand with the novel Transformers Exodus, which contains more extensive recounts of the events in the game. War for Cybertron contains 10 chapters in total, 5 for the Decepticon campaign and 5 for the Autobot campaign. The Decepticon campaign chronologically occurs before its Autobot counterpart, though the player is able to interchange between the two campaigns at will. Each level provides the player with 3 characters to choose from, and the game saw many characters from the original cartoon returning with all new Cybertronian redesigns. War for Cybertron gives players 2 weapons at a time, though weapons can be picked up or reloaded throughout the level. They are also able to switch to their alternate mode at will, with some parts of levels featuring alternate mode sections where a ground or aerial vehicle is required to maneuver through a part of the level. Levels see players gunning down swarms of very generic enemies, ranging from simple grunts to larger enemies, snipers, aerial enemies, and much more. Each level is capped off with a boss that the player must defeat. War for Cybertron also contained multiple multiplayer features. A mode referred to as Escalation saw players teaming up on servers to take down hordes of enemies for as long as they were able. Another multiplayer mode was available in which players were placed on teams and were pit against each other in a deathmatch, and other modes, such as Code of Power, the equivalent of Capture the Flag. In these deathmatches, players could choose from 4 different classes: Scout, Scientist, Leader, and Soldier, all based off of body types of playable characters in the game that play the exact same way. Players were also able to go through the campaign online with friends or other online players, though this feature was of low quality. War for Cybertron was received extremely well, and generally received scores of 8 to 9 out of 10. This would prompt the game to receive a sequel in 2012, but not before. Released for Wii and Wii U, DS and 3DS in 2012, Transformers Prime the game was developed by Outrun and Now Production, and was published by Activision. The game is heavily influenced by its title show, the story of the game featuring simplified events that occur in the show, though the main plot of the game focuses on the Autobots and Decepticons attempting to gain control of a Dark Energon meteorite. The game allows you to take control of one of the main 5 Autobots in each of the 13 stages that involve battling hordes of enemies and bosses. The gameplay involves third-person melee combat, focusing on the player fighting random enemies that spawn in the stages, though the game also features brief shooting segments. The game also contains various collectibles that are scattered throughout the stages that allow characters to have their abilities and skills upgraded. The console and handheld version of the game are mostly similar, barring graphical differences and gameplay changes, though the 3DS version makes use of its 3D function and touchscreen to add variety to the gameplay. Prime the game also contains a multiplayer mode where 2 players are pitted against one another in an arena to try and take each other out. The main difference in the multiplayer mode is the ability to play as Decepticons that are unplayable in the story mode. The game received mostly positive reviews, earning itself an 8 out of 10 from IGN. The critically acclaimed Transformers Fall of Cybertron was released in 2012 for PlayStation 3 and Xbox, and was a sequel to the earlier released War for Cybertron. It was once again developed by High Moon Studios, and the gameplay is mostly unchanged from its predecessor. The story of Fall of Cybertron continues directly after War for Cybertron, focusing on the latter half of the war. The game sees the Autobots attempting to escape a dying Cybertron, and a portion of the game also focuses on the creation of the Dinobots. Unlike War for Cybertron, the game features 13 levels where a character of either faction is selected for the player to take control of. In terms of gameplay, Fall of Cybertron grants each character with their own unique abilities, such as Optimus ordering a missile strike or Cliffjumper being able to cloak himself. The game also contains an upgrade system where Energon collected by the player can be spent on weapon upgrades. Fall of Cybertron also features sections where the player can take control of either Grimlock or Bruticus, and the 2 play differently to other characters in the game. Both are melee characters and focus on using melee weapons to dispatch enemies. Bruticus can stomp and unleash a wave to destroy any enemies caught in it, while Grimlock can transform into his dinosaur mode and breathe fire. Fall of Cybertron's multiplayer mode is very similar to its predecessor, though classes are now customizable. Online players can also now level up with each match and gain experience depending on how well they performed. Fall of Cybertron was critically acclaimed across the board, gaining an even higher score than that of War for Cybertron, its scores nearing a perfect 10. This would prompt yet another sequel, though this time with a bit of a twist. An arcade rail shooter by the name of Transformers Human Alliance was released in 2013 by Sega. The gameplay mirrors that of most rail shooters, with players using mounted gun turrets to fire at the enemies on screen. Hitting targets continuously results in a combo ranking, and will ultimately earn more points. Players defeat swarms of Decepticon enemies throughout the 5 stages, with various bosses appearing throughout, in which an Autobot appears and battles said boss, causing the player to have to shoot at their weak points in order to aid the Autobot. The game is also 2-player, allowing 2 people to take control of the turrets and slag Decepticons together. Transformers Rise of the Dark Spark was yet another third-person shooter set in the continuity of the Aligned universe, though with a few notable differences. Half of the game takes place in between the story of War for Cybertron and Fall of Cybertron, while the other half takes place in an alternate Age of Extinction continuity. The game was produced by both Hasbro and Activision, but was not developed by High Moon Studios this time, rather a company called Edge of Reality. It was released for PlayStation 3 and 4, Xbox 360 and 1, Wii U and PC in 2014. The game contains over 40 playable characters and contains 14 levels, like that of Fall of Cybertron, in which the player is given a random character to take control of during the game. The gameplay is largely unchanged from Fall of Cybertron, including the same upgrade system from the game. Bruticus appears once again in the level of the game and plays the same as he did in the previous game, and Grimlock from Age of Extinction is able to be played as for a certain level, and features essentially the same gameplay style as Grimlock from Fall of Cybertron. The escalation mode from Fall of Cybertron also made a reappearance. The story of Rise of the Darkspark focuses on the titular Darkspark, which both Megatron and Lockdown wish to acquire in their respective universes. Rise of the Darkspark received very average reviews, and both the story and reused and unchanged gameplay were criticized by critics. Rise of the Darkspark also saw a release on the Nintendo 3DS, though was drastically different from that of the console version. As opposed to being a shooter, the 3DS version of Rise of the Darkspark was a strategy RPG developed by Wafer Technologies. The game contains over 50 playable characters and 33 missions to play in total. Each of the maps and missions take place on a flat surface broken into various squares that the player and AI can move on in turns. The player has to move the units they are provided with in each level to attack the opponent's units. During battle segments, the graphics become three-dimensional and the battle system is that of a turn-based combat game. Each of the turns provide both combatants with points that they can use to perform one of 7 attacks. Blocking is also available, and these battles grant the player with experience that are used to improve the stats of characters. This version of the game also received average scores from critics. The most recently released Transformers game as of this video on console is Transformers Devastation, a game developed by Platinum Games and released in 2015 for PlayStation 3, 4, Xbox 360, 1 and PC. The game spans 7 chapters within different environments located on both Earth and Cybertron. The game also contains a challenge mode featuring over 50 missions. The plot of the game sees Megatron attempting to cyberform Earth using his Insecticon army, all the while acquiring the powerful Ferrotaxis located within the crash ship of Nova Prime, a goal Optimus swears he will stop. The game allows you to play as one of the 5 Autobots available to players in each level: Optimus, Bumblebee, Wheeljack, Sideswipe, and Grimlock, all of which play differently. Unlike the previously released Aligned games, however, Devastation is a hack-and-slash brawler similar to that of Platinum Games' other titles, such as Bayonetta and Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. As a result, Devastation focuses more on melee attacks than shooting, though blasters and other projectile-based weaponry are available in the game to use to dispatch enemies, albeit with scarce ammo. The main selling point of the game was the ability to take on fearsome combiners, of which the game gives you 2, Menacer and Devastator. Various other drones based on pre-existing Transformers characters appear as enemies players must battle within the levels, and the game only becomes more difficult as the levels progress. The game allowed players to hold up to 2 weapons at a time, 2 melee weapons and 2 projectile weapons. The player is able to switch these weapons if they wish after collecting weapons as a reward for completing missions. Players are also able to purchase upgrades for their character using credits collected during the level. During combat, multiple melee and vehicle mode attacks are able to be performed, though the player is also able to evade attacks, and if they do so at the right moment are able to enter a cooldown period in which time slows down to allow the player to get some extra hits in. Each character also has their own special ability that deals massive damage. Transformers Devastation was met with critical acclaim, and though no sequel has been announced as of yet, the game did have some downloadable content. Alternate character and weapon skins that allow the players to play as Nemesis Prime, Goldfire, and Red Alert. That's it for this video, but come back next time as we delve into the final part of Transformers game history, apps and mobile games. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video as much as I did making it, and be sure to leave a like and comment if you did. Also be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to keep up to date with future videos. Thanks, and I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya!
What's the matter, kid? You never seen a space slug before?
They're a part of Cybertron's natural defenses. They'll eat away at the Dark Energon's corruption.
The corruption sealed us in! We're stuck!
Let me try.
Hey guys, it's Diamondbolt. Today I've found a G1 Transformers quiz where basically you have to name a bunch of Transformers characters.
and I'm just gonna give it a shot and see how many characters I can name. I'll leave a link in the description so you can try it yourself. Alright, let's get started. Well, I did my best. What'd I get? 85%. I'm happy with that. I'm disappointed I missed a few people. Who did I get? Oh, I missed Ultra Magnus? Come on. Nah. I'm not good with the headmasters and all that. I don't remember their names. Oh well. I think I did reasonably well. See if you can beat my score. You probably can. So I'll leave a link in the description for you. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time. More Than Meets the Eye is my favourite thing to come out of IDW. I'm so sorry, Last Stand. And not too long ago it hit its big 50th issue, and celebrated with a 6-part epic arc to finish up the comic before it relaunches as Lost Light later this year. This arc was called Dying for Light and featured a majority of the characters of More Than Meets the Eye to date, with a few extras. So how was it? Look, James Roberts wrote it, of course it was amazing. The comic opens up with the main Lost Lighters recounting their dying wishes, and we get to see our characters' reactions to this. It is later revealed that the main cast of the Lost Light, Rodimus, Brainstorm, Chrome Dome, Cyclonus, Megatron, Ultra Magnus, Nautica, Nightbeat, Ravage, Rewind, Rung, Skid, Swerve, Tailgate, 10, Velocity, and Well were all exiled from the Lost Light thanks to Getaway convincing the other crew members into a mutiny, as they were sick of being on a ship co-piloted with their previous worst enemy, who was single-handedly responsible for the Cybertronium Great War. Can you blame them? The Lost Lighters found themselves on the Necrobot's planet. They found the Necrobot already dead. They also discovered a bunch of defenseless life forms within the citadel of the planet, and so instead of using the method of escaping they found, as Megatron decided, they would stay and protect them. Protect them from whom, you ask? Well, only the entirety of Deathsaurus' army, and the Decepticon Justice Division. Oh, and Overlord. Yeah, they're gonna be just fine. Dying of the Light was advertised as killing off some of its main characters. I remember my first reaction to reading the blurb for issue 54. No! In the end, Dying of the Light killed off Ravage, the entirety of the DJD, the Pet, the Necrobot, and Skids. Skids' death was done absolutely perfectly, and I found myself tearing up in the same vein as that of when I read Rewind's death for the first time way back in issue 15. His character arc was finally concluded. He had recovered his lost memories and discovered the truth about his horrible past, and died knowing the truth, all the while helping his friends live. It was truly beautiful, and I miss him so much already, but not as much as Nautica did. Her reaction made it even more tragic. As I previously mentioned, it was split into 6 parts. How bright their frail deeds, the sun in flight, your fierce tears, at close of day, rage, rage, and do not go gentle. As well as the short story within the double-sized issue 50, no guns, no swords, no briefcases. So many mysteries were solved during the course of these 6 issues, such as the location of Dominus Ambus as the pet, and Rewind sacrificing his former lover to save his new one, Skids' past with Tarn, Megatron coming to terms with his violent tendencies and discovering he wasn't being drugged at all, and finally letting loose on the DJD, and so much more was contained during Dying of the Light. It's amazing how much was fit into this 6-parter, and shows that despite the series running for over 4 years now, James Roberts hasn't lost his touch, writing utterly fantastic twists and turns into his stories. Dominus Ambus being the pet, for example, was an amazing plot twist that I never saw coming in an overall sensational story, as was the rivalry between Tarn and Overlord, and Kaon's shocking death that proved how far Tarn was willing to go to prove to Overlord that the DJD were for real. Ratchet and Drift finally made a reappearance, Drift not being seen since his exile in issue 16, returning to the Lost Lighters after being away in the mini-series Empire of Stone, and they had all new and awesome redesigns. The rush of hope I received when seeing these two show up for the first time truly showed me how immersed in this series I was. No other comic, movie, book, or anything I've ever read before has ever done that to me. That's what makes More Than Meets the Eye, and Dying of the Light, so special to me. It was done so amazingly well. Seeing Rodimus give a group hug to everyone before they went out to fight the combined forces of Deathsaurus' Armada and the DJD, well, it was a touching moment, one of many in this epic story arc. The final battle was done in a similar manner to the final 3-parter of Beast Machines, in which our heroes are trapped and cornered by overwhelming odds, and have to protect an area filled with unguarded life. They then receive a power boost and use it to survive, eventually winning thanks to a sacrifice. Dying of the Light did it much better, however. In the end, after unlocking his memories, Skids' spark released a wave of emotional energy that supercharged our heroes, allowing them to hold off the overwhelming odds until Megatron showed up.
And I must point out, the final battle scene was absolutely amazing. Every single character got a time to shine, including the punch-happy Tailgate, and we got to see every one of our favourites being an absolute badass. It looked as if the Lost Lighters were going to win, but then their power started to run out as Skids' spark faded away. All was lost until Megatron showed up, donning his fusion cannon, and killed everyone to death. And though he seemed beaten, he managed to tear apart the DJD using his black hole powers after Overlord decided he wasn't worth finishing off and Deathsaurus just had enough and decided to call it a day.
F this shit, I'm out.
Okay, he was hit by a psychic blast from Swerve and Rewind and, grieving the amount of troops he had lost, decided to withdraw. It makes sense, sure, but it was still kinda lame and rushed. And then the story was brought to a close.
Alex Milne, as always, did an absolutely sensational job with the art over the 6 issues, once again presenting bright and vibrant colours during a story about tragedy and death. Every single character jumped off the page and it was as appealing to look at as it was to read. One interesting little tidbit was the introduction of emotive insignias. Yes, you heard me right. On occasion, both Autobot and Decepticon insignias could be seen with emotive faces during various scenes, such as Ratchet's sad Autobot symbol during Skids' death, or Rodimus' happy symbol during his Flame On moment. It was adorable. Of all 6 issues, my favourite was issue 53, in which we get to see the Lost Lighters preparing for the epic duel that awaited them, watching them say their last goodbyes and scavenging anything they could to fight back, such as Brainstorm's modified Maximus Ambus armour, which was thrilling, emotional, and an absolute joy to read overall. The only complaints I have was the ending. It felt very forced and rushed, and unfortunately brought down the epicness of the other 5 parts. In this ending, we get Megatron versus the Decepticon Justice Division, but it isn't as epic as what I was hoping. While I was expecting an amazing fight scene where Megatron completely trashes the team, what we got instead was not that bad. Megatron harnessing the power of a black hole, harnering back to the days of G1 in which Megatron initially was able to do so, and he uses that to tear apart the DJD one by one, revealing their true names as he did so, but it was done in a very quick and anticlimactic manner. Tarn's death was the worst one. We got to finally get the big reveal of who Tarn truly was. Surprise, it wasn't Roller. I really wish it was Roller now. Midway through the final issue, we see Roller and a group of other Transformers appear before the Lost Lighters, ones that had disappeared. It turns out the Necrobot had decided to do some good with his abilities, and so saved them after they had been lost in time, explaining away Roller's disappearance in earlier issues. What this meant was that we had to work out who Tarn was now. In this panel, Megatron calls Tarn Glitch. I initially thought this was an insult, considering that Transformers commonly say spawn of a glitch, and it took me a while to work out that Glitch was Tarn's actual name. So who was Glitch? Well, Glitch was another one of the outliers that fought alongside Roller and Orion back in the war, and he also disappeared with no explanation. We were being led to believe that Roller was Tarn, but instead it was one of his teammates that was a very minor character that not many remembered. And to be honest, this was a bit of a letdown. However, I guess with limited page space, James Robert wrote a fitting death for the DJD, having them die by Megatron's hand and showing that the Tyrant was still as badass as he always had been, he just needed a little push. Dying of the Light was written masterfully, and brought More Than Meets the Eye to an end in an epic way. I cannot tell you how ecstatic I am to continue reading the adventures of Roddy and Co., especially now that the series ended on a geobomb detonating within the Necrobot's planet's core. And I also cannot wait to see the confrontation between Getaway and Rodimus, and Megatron dealing with whose side he should stay on, clearly conflicted by Ravager's dying words. And also why the hell Rodimus is purple. Dying of the Light was an amazing story betrayed only by an anticlimactic ending, and so gets an 8.5 out of 10 from me. And though not the best More Than Meets the Eye story, is certainly up there in the top 10. Now, if only this boring Titans Return stories could finish so we can get to the good stuff.